Hatchard, welcome back to the Hacker News Daily, where we bring you the top stories that dominated the tech community's discussions yesterday. I'm your host, and wow, did we have some intense conversations on the front page. Out of 30 stories that made waves, we've picked the 5 that really captured the community's attention. And honestly, there's a theme running through all of them today: trust, control, and the evolving relationship between tech companies and their users. We're talking about Slack essentially holding a nonprofit's data hostage for $200,000, Nvidia dropping $5 billion to cozy up with their longtime rival, Meta trying to put cameras and displays on everyone's faces while nobody trusts them with their grocery list, and surprisingly, a story about Linux desktop environments that's actually optimistic. Plus, we've got a clever hack that makes text disappear from screenshots because sometimes the simplest tricks spark the best discussions. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into what had everyone talking yesterday. Story 1. Slack's ransom demand. All right, now we're diving into a story that absolutely blew up on Hacker News this week. Slack has raised our charges by $195K per year. And folks, this one's a doozy. Nearly 3,000 points and over 1,200 comments. And when you hear what happened, you'll understand why people are so fired up. So here's what went down. Hack Club, and if you don't know them, they're this amazing nonprofit that teaches teenagers how to code. They've been using Slack for 11 years. 11 years. We're talking about their entire organizational history living in those chat logs. And out of nowhere, Slack, or really Salesforce at this point, drops this bombshell on them. They want to increase their annual fee from $5,000 to $200,000. That's not a typo. We're talking about a 40x increase. But wait, it gets worse. They gave Hack Club less than a week's notice. Less than a week. And here's the kicker. If they didn't pay up, Slack was threatening to not just deactivate their workspace, but completely delete everything. All those years of history, conversations, decisions, institutional knowledge, just gone. The founder of Hack Club, Zach Latta, took to social media and wow, did the internet respond. The story hit the front page of Hacker News and stayed there. Tech Twitter went absolutely ballistic. And you know what? It worked. Within hours, Slack's CEO personally reached out, apologized, and offered them a 5-year Enterprise Plus plan for free. But here's what really gets me about this whole situation, and what a lot of commenters were pointing out. This isn't just about one nonprofit getting squeezed. This is about the entire model of how SaaS companies operate. One commenter called it ransomware as a service. And honestly, that's not far off. You build your entire organization around these tools, your data lives there, your workflows depend on them, and then they've got you. The discussion thread was fascinating because people started sharing similar stories. Apparently, Slack pulled something similar with the Kubernetes project and other CNCF initiatives. There's this pattern emerging where once you hit a certain size or visibility, suddenly the pricing model needs to be adjusted. And it's always with this impossibly short deadline that forces you to either pay up immediately or lose everything. What really struck me was how many people in the comments were done with Slack after this, like completely done. There was this massive thread about alternatives, Mattermost, Zulip, Discord, even going back to IRC. People were sharing migration scripts, talking about data export strategies. It's like watching an entire community realize in real time that they need exit strategies for their communication platforms. And you know what's wild? Even after Slack made it right with the free enterprise plan, the trust is just broken. Multiple commenters pointed out that this only got fixed because it went viral. What about all the organizations that don't have that kind of reach? What about the small nonprofits that can't mobilize Twitter to shame a Fortune 500 company? There was this one comment that really stuck with me. Someone said that when Salesforce acquired Slack, everyone joked about how they'd ruin it, but nobody expected them to speedrun the enshittification process quite this fast. And that's kind of what we're seeing across the board with these acquisitions, right? The playbook seems to be acquire, integrate, then extract maximum value from the locked-in customer base. The technical discussions were interesting too. People were debating whether you could really replace Slack given how deeply integrated it is with other tools. But others were pointing out that maybe that's the trap. We've let these platforms become so central to our operations that we can't imagine working without them. One person mentioned they'd successfully moved their organization to Mattermost, though another warned that Mattermost is starting to cripple their open source edition too. What this really highlights is the fundamental problem with SaaS as a model for critical infrastructure. When your communication history, your documentation, your institutional knowledge, when all of that lives on someone else's servers, you're always one pricing change away from a crisis. And sure, Slack backed down this time, but the message is clear. They can do this whenever they want, and the only thing stopping them is bad PR. The whole incident has people rethinking their entire approach to these tools. Self-hosting is making a comeback in these discussions. People are talking about data sovereignty, about keeping backups, about never letting a vendor have this much leverage again. It's like we're watching a real-time awakening about the dangers of platform dependency. And honestly, good. Maybe we needed this wake-up call. Because if a company valued at $230 billion is willing to shake down a nonprofit that teaches kids to code, just imagine what they're willing to do to everyone else. Speaking of companies with too much power making unexpected moves, now we're diving into what might be the most surprising tech partnership of the year. Nvidia buys $5 billion in Intel. Yeah, you heard that right. Nvidia, the GPU giant that's been riding the AI wave to become one of the world's most valuable companies, just dropped $5 billion to buy a chunk of Intel, their longtime rival. This isn't just a financial investment. We're talking about a fundamental reshaping of the semiconductor landscape. So here's what's actually happening. Nvidia is purchasing about 5% of Intel's common stock at $23.28 per share, and Intel stock absolutely exploded on the news, jumping 33% in pre-market trading. But the money is almost secondary to what these two companies are planning to build together. They're announcing joint development of multiple generations of x86 products, including, and this is where it gets really interesting, gaming-focused Intel x86 RTX SACs. We're talking Intel CPUs literally fused with Nvidia RTX graphics chiplets. Can you imagine? After years of Intel trying to break into discrete graphics with Arc and Nvidia dominating that space, now they're working together. But wait, there's more to unpack here. Intel will also be manufacturing custom x86 data center CPUs specifically for Nvidia's AI products. This is huge for Nvidia's supply chain diversification. They've been so dependent on TSMC, and now they're getting Intel's fabs in their corner. It's fascinating timing, too, because Intel's new CEO, Lip-Bu Tan, just came out saying Intel isn't even a top 10 chip maker anymore. That's a brutal admission for a company that basically invented the modern microprocessor. Now, the Hacker News crowd, 530 comments worth, they're not buying the Kumbaya narrative here. The overwhelming sentiment is actually pretty dark. Most commenters are terrified this means the death of Intel Arc, which, let's be honest, was the only thing keeping some semblance of competition alive in the GPU market. One commenter put it perfectly. They said this feels like Nvidia is essentially paying $5 billion to eliminate their only real competition in discrete graphics. And when you think about GPU prices over the last few years, yeah, that's a scary thought. There's also this whole geopolitical angle that's got people fired up. Some folks are convinced this isn't really about business strategy at all. They think this is the US government pulling strings behind the scenes to prop up domestic semiconductor manufacturing. With all the CHIPS Act funding and the push for supply chain independence from Asia, having Nvidia invest in Intel keeps that manufacturing capacity alive and relevant. It's almost like national security through corporate partnership. But here's where it gets really interesting. Not everyone's doom and gloom about this. A few commenters are drawing parallels to when Microsoft invested in Apple back in '97. Remember that? Everyone thought it was crazy, but it helped save Apple and ultimately kept competition alive in the operating system market. The optimists are saying maybe, just maybe, this could help Intel get back on its feet and actually become a stronger competitor in the long run. The technical implications are mind-bending too. Think about what an Intel x86 RTX SoC could mean for gaming laptops and compact systems. No more separate CPU and GPU chips eating up space and power. We're talking about genuinely integrated high-performance computing. And for data centers, custom x86 chips built specifically for Nvidia's AI workloads could be incredibly efficient compared to the general-purpose processors they're using now. But let's address the elephant in the room. What happens to Intel Arc? Nvidia now owns 5% of Intel, and while that's not controlling interest, it's enough to have a voice in the boardroom. Several commenters pointed out that killing Arc might actually hurt Intel's overall value proposition and trigger antitrust scrutiny. Plus, Intel's got contracts and commitments to Arc customers that they can't just walk away from. So maybe Arc survives, though probably not as the Nvidia killer Intel hoped it would be. The timing of this announcement is almost poetic in its irony. Intel, once the undisputed king of semiconductors, is now taking investment from a company that was just a graphics card maker when Intel was at its peak. It really shows how dramatically the tech landscape has shifted with the AI boom. Nvidia's market cap is now, 10 times Intel's? That would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago. You know what really strikes me, though? This partnership essentially acknowledges that the old model of vertically integrated chip companies doing everything themselves, it's dead. Even giants like Intel and Nvidia need each other now. The complexity and cost of modern chip development and manufacturing has gotten so astronomical that collaboration might be the only way forward. It's like we're seeing the semiconductor industry mature into something more like the auto industry, where even competitors share platforms and technologies. Now, speaking of trust and control over technology, let's talk about another company that wants to put their hardware literally on your face. The trust deficit here is just massive. One commenter pointed out that Meta stores your voice recordings for up to a year. And unless you're in the EU, there's literally no way to opt out of them using all your data for AI training. Everything you say, everything you see through those cameras, every interaction, it's all fair game for Meta's machine learning models. And people are really, really uncomfortable with that. There's this fascinating comment from someone who actually bought Meta's Portal TV. Remember that, the video calling device for your TV? Well, they're still bitter about it because Meta just discontinued it, killed the whole product line. And now they're saying, look, fool me once with the Portal, shame on you, but I'm not getting burned again with these glasses that'll probably be abandoned in 2 years. But then, and this is what makes this story so compelling, you've got users like A.A. Cook who are already using the current Ray-Bans without displays and absolutely loving them. They're recording their kids' first bike rides, capturing moments while cycling, using them for hands-free calls. Though even they admit the battery life is rough, and apparently if you sweat too much, the glasses just stop working, which is not ideal for a device you wear on your face. There's actually this really interesting split in the comments between people who want more technology and those who want less. One user, Choop Chop, makes this great point. They bought the Ray-Bans specifically because they don't have a display. They're saying, look, I already stare at screens all day. The last thing I need is another one literally attached to my face. But they love having the camera and audio features for when they're out and about. The neural wristband thing, though, that's got everyone's attention. Even the Meta skeptics are like, okay, that's actually incredible. The idea that you could type or control interfaces just by thinking about moving your fingers without actually moving them, that's the kind of interface breakthrough that could change everything about how we interact with AR devices. But it all comes back to this fundamental question that the community is wrestling with. Can you separate the technology from the company? And overwhelmingly, the answer seems to be no. People are literally saying they would buy this exact same device from almost any other company. Apple, Google, even Microsoft. But Meta, that's a bridge too far. Someone in the comments made this really pointed observation. They said, Meta has become the Facebook of hardware companies, which is ironic since, Meta literally is Facebook. But what they meant was that just like how Facebook became synonymous with privacy violations and sketchy data practices, Meta's hardware division is developing that same reputation. Every product comes with this asterisk of, yeah, but what are they doing with my data? And you know what's wild? Meta knows this. They have to know this. They're putting out these incredible technical achievements. I mean, a neural interface wristband, it actually works. That's huge. But they can't shake this reputation they've built over years of, well, being Meta. The whole discussion really highlights this broader tension in tech right now between capability and trust. We're at this point where the technology to create truly magical experiences exists. AR glasses that actually work, neural interfaces that let you type with your mind, but the companies with the resources to build this stuff are often the ones we trust the least with our personal data. It's fascinating and frustrating in equal measure. And honestly, I think we're going to see this pattern repeat with every Meta hardware launch until they fundamentally change how they handle user privacy, or until someone else beats them to market with similar tech and better privacy practices. After all this talk about vendor lock-in, corporate distrust, and privacy concerns, let me shift to something more positive. A story about open source software that's actually getting better. Now, shifting gears to something that really caught fire on Hacker News this week, KDE is now my favorite desktop. And honestly, this story resonates with so many of us who've been on that Linux desktop journey. With over 750 points and more than 600 comments, this really struck a chord. So here's what happened. This user had been running Sway, which, if you're not familiar, is this super minimalist tiling window manager, very keyboard-driven, very efficient, the kind of setup that makes you feel like a hacker in a movie. But then reality hit. They needed to share their gaming rig with their wife, and suddenly all those keyboard shortcuts and minimal interfaces weren't looking so appealing anymore. So they switched to KDE Plasma, expecting it to be, fine, functional, good enough for the family. But here's where it gets interesting. They didn't just tolerate KDE, they fell in love with it. And not in a, oh, this is nice for Linux kind of way, but in a, wait, this is actually better than Windows and Mac OS way. Let me give you some specifics that blew their mind. The network applet, something we all take for granted, right? Click on the Wi-Fi icon, connect to a network, done. But KDE's version, it shows you everything. Channel information, signal strength, exact frequency, MAC addresses, BSS ID, all the stuff you'd normally need to fire up a terminal or download a third-party tool to see. And get this, it has a built-in QR code generator for sharing Wi-Fi credentials. Your friend comes over, you click a button, they scan a code, boom, they're connected. Apple added something similar recently and made a big deal about it. The KDEs just had it there, quietly being useful. The screenshot tool is another revelation. You take a screenshot, crop it, maybe blur out some sensitive info, then you realize you need to retake it. In KDE, when you hit that screenshot button again, it remembers exactly where you cropped last time. Such a small thing, but it's these little touches that add up to a completely different experience. And then there's the window rules feature. Okay, so you know how Steam always steals focus when it starts up? Super annoying when you're in the middle of something. On Windows, you'd need some hacky workaround or third-party utility. On KDE, you just create a rule. Hey, when Steam launches, don't let it steal focus. Done. Problem solved forever. The community response to this has been fascinating. The comment section turned into this massive therapy session of people who'd made similar journeys. So many stories of folks who tried GNOME, got frustrated when their extensions broke after an update, or couldn't customize something basic, and then discovered KDE was just better. There's this recurring theme in the discussion about how KDE chose a different path than GNOME. While GNOME kept redesigning things, breaking extensions, pursuing this vision of simplicity that often felt more like removing features, KDE just kept polishing, year after year, fixing bugs, adding little quality of life improvements, making things more consistent. And now, according to many commenters, it's reached this point where it's not just good for Linux, it's legitimately more functional than commercial operating systems. One commenter put it perfectly. They said GNOME is like iOS and KDE is like Android. GNOME might look a bit prettier out of the box, but if you want to actually change anything meaningful, you hit a wall fast. KDE gives you the tools to make it exactly what you want. Now, to be fair, not everyone's drinking the KDE Kool-Aid. There was one user, Adam KF, who came in hot with a completely different experience. They're talking about Windows disappearing, having to log out and back in to fix basic functionality issues, calling the whole thing unusable. And you know what? That's Linux for you. Your mileage may vary, depending on your hardware, your distro, what phase the moon is in. There were also some valid criticisms about the visual design. Some users find KDE ugly compared to GNOME or macOS, citing inconsistent padding, weird font choices, and those infamous K names for everything: console, Kate, Krita. Though honestly, after using Linux for a while, you kind of become immune to the quirky naming conventions. But here's what really strikes me about this whole discussion. We're at this point where a Linux desktop environment isn't just catching up to proprietary systems, it's actually surpassing them in meaningful ways. The author mentions features they miss when they have to use Windows or macOS. That's a huge shift from even 5 years ago when switching to Linux meant accepting compromises. And that transition story, from minimalist window manager to full desktop environment because of family needs, that's so real. How many of us have had to dial back our ultra-customized, keyboard-only setups because we needed to share a computer with someone who just wants things to work? The fact that KDE can satisfy both the power user, who came from Sway, and the spouse who just wants to check email, that's the sweet spot right there. The comments also highlighted KDE Connect, which, if you haven't tried it, imagine if your phone and computer actually talk to each other properly. Shared clipboard, remote control, file transfers, notification sync, all working seamlessly between your Android phone and Linux desktop. Again, features that Apple charges a premium for in their ecosystem, just sitting there in KDE, free and open source. What we're really seeing here is the payoff from a philosophy of incremental improvement over radical redesign. While other projects chase the next big thing, KDE just kept making what they had better, bit by bit, until suddenly it's really, really good. And maybe that's a lesson for the broader tech industry. Sometimes boring is beautiful, and consistency beats disruption. And speaking of clever tech that sparks interesting discussions, let's wrap up with something a bit lighter but equally thought-provoking. Story 5, the uncapturable text. All right, so this next one really got my eye. The text disappears when you screenshot it. This is one of those show HN posts that just makes you go, wait, what? And with over 500 points and nearly 200 comments, I'm clearly not the only one who found this fascinating. So here's the deal. Someone created this webpage where the text literally vanishes when you try to take a screenshot of it. It's like digital magic, except it's actually just really clever engineering. The way it works is through rapid pixel animation. The text is essentially flickering so fast that your eyes perceive it as stable, but when you take a screenshot, you're only capturing one frame of that animation cycle, and boom, no text. What I love about this is it's one of those ideas that seems impossible at first, right? Like, how can something be visible to your eyes but not to a screenshot? But once you understand the mechanism, it's actually brilliantly simple. And the Hacker News community went absolutely wild with this, coming up with all sorts of ways to defeat it and potential applications. The technical discussions in the comments are gold. People are sharing workarounds like, okay, get this, taking multiple screenshots and overlaying them with blending modes, or using long exposure photography. Someone even mentioned just pointing another phone at the screen, which is hilariously low-tech but totally effective. It's like watching a bunch of hackers collectively say challenge accepted and then proceeding to break the thing in 20 different ways. But here's where it gets really interesting. people started connecting this to other similar implementations they've seen. There's apparently this whole thing with bad Apple videos that use similar techniques, and someone mentioned Branta games that actually disappear when you pause them. Can you imagine? You're playing a game, you hit pause to grab a snack, and the game just vanishes from your screen? Now, the practical applications discussion is where things get spicy. Some folks are thinking this could be huge for privacy protection. Imagine showing your driver's license or passport on your phone, but it can't be screenshotted by someone looking over your shoulder. Digital identity documents that resist casual copying. Though, as multiple commenters pointed out, if someone really wants to capture your screen, they're gonna find a way. Video recording defeats it instantly, for one. And then there's this brilliant inverse idea someone threw out there. Like, you look at your screen and see nothing, but take a screenshot and suddenly there's a message. That's some next-level steganography thinking right there. Of course, we can't ignore the accessibility concerns. Several users mentioned motion sickness from the flickering effect. Even if it's not consciously perceptible, it's a good reminder that clever visual tricks can have unintended consequences for some users. What strikes me most about this whole discussion is how it perfectly captures the hacker mindset. Someone creates a "you can't screenshot this" effect, and within hours, the community has not only figured out multiple ways to defeat it, but also brainstormed legitimate use cases, identified potential problems, and suggested completely inverted implementations. It's this beautiful cycle of creation, deconstruction, and reimagination that makes the tech community so vibrant. The fact that this is essentially a visual DRM system that's already been cracked in the comments section is, well, it's pretty much the story of every DRM system ever created, isn't it? But that doesn't make the technique any less clever or the discussion any less valuable. Sometimes the journey is more interesting than the destination.